just out of the gym, about to hit salsa dancing. I've got a full night ahead of me, so I'm going to make a quick video here about how you can better integrate your shadow. Now, for those of you guys wondering, what is the shadow? Think of it as what is typically deemed as evil, dark, repressed in you. You can think of them as the sexual, violent, and things about yourself that society does not typically approve of, but they are crucial to integrate into your being. And I'm making content about that, so if you're interested in seeing more and learning more about that process, please hit subscribe and like. It goes a long way for me to create this content. So why would we want to integrate our shadow? Well, it's simply because that as being a part of you, when you don't integrate it, you become susceptible to acting out in rage or anger. Have you ever seen somebody out of nowhere start screaming at their kid or their partner, and you're out there in public like, where's my phone? Where's my phone? And just acting like you know nothing about that situation? I have. And if you come from a familial background that has trauma, you've seen it in your personal life. Maybe you have been affected by this shadow projection. So typically, how do we deal with this? We have religions. And oftentimes, religions give us a very good code of ethics and dogma that we can use to prescribe and handle some more shadow-like emotions. And that's great. If we fast, if we pray, and we find that that is being helpful in assimilating the shadow content. But unfortunately, in the modern world, with a hyper-civilized culture, where we are putting out a persona, where we are putting out parts of ourselves that are very not in tune with what we once were, right? We're less authentic, we're more civilized, right? We sit down with the fork and the knife. There are a lot of aspects of our current culture, right, that are not in tune with what they were 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, even 100 years ago. And so, because of our civilization, because of how we've adapted as human beings, right, we cannot give the full expression of our being, right? Somebody cannot come up to us, do something to us, irk us in a certain way, and so we go out and just punch them in the face, right? And so the religion's response to that is, well, don't hurt your neighbor, right? Or to contain yourself. But what actually happens is you become like a sparkling bottle of water, right? So the emotions are fizzling up, and you keep the bottle on cap. And then there comes a moment where I'm sure if you're a part of this religious sect and you haven't found a way to integrate your shadow, you realize that the bottle will unscrew, you'll do some really great big sinful act, and then you get back into the cycle of shame and guilt. I think a lot of men suffer from this when it comes to pornography. I think a lot of women suffer from this when it comes to social media addiction. I think that these are just some of the small ailments that we see on a grander societal scale. You can think of it as war, the repression of violence, and then poof, we have a third world war on our hands, right? And so if any of you guys are familiar with Jung, he was very aware of the tide of the modern world and where we were headed, right? Because he realized that, and there was not a predecessor, there was someone that came after him that came up with the new ethic. Jungian, he wrote The Great Mother. He's not, Eric Newman. And Eric Newman came up with the new ethic, proclaiming that modern society had to go further in shadow integration if we were to truly become whole. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth with the shadow, but I will be outlining ways in which that we can integrate the shadow, right? And specifically in relation to our parents. Because when we are born, right, we see our parents as our superheroes. They're our ideals. They capitulate everything, they encapture rather, everything that we desire to become. And so it becomes very easy for us to not see the part of them that is shadow and the part of them that is good. Because it all becomes enraptured as good. And so what really happens at that point in time is that we become a copy of our parents. Yes, we have our own likes and dislikes, but on a deep behavioral level, we start replicating their behaviors. Or we develop our own psychic responses to who they are. So if they treat us in a certain way, right? If our parent is really disposed to getting angry, we might either become really angry people, or we might overcompensate and never get angry. And then all of a sudden, anybody who wants to do anything with us can do that to us, right? And that is just as dangerous. It's just as dangerous not to be angry as it is to be angry, right? In a way, because it lacks duality. And human emotions is a tide. And you have to be able to maintain that dualistic perspective. Otherwise, you lose a crucial part of yourself. And that's the full human experience. And so if you know this, if you realize that as you come into adulthood, as you grow, you need to start identifying the parts of your parents that were good, the parts of your parents that were more shadowy and typically repressed, and that may have gotten projected onto you, which is even worse, that they treated you in that manner instead of handling themselves like a mature emotional adult. Then it becomes your responsibility to go back and see, to understand their personality, how they impacted your life, how they impacted your thought process, how they impacted your soul. And so one way of doing this is just to take out a blank piece of paper and start writing. You can journal about your parents, and slowly the memories will come back. You'll become more conscious of what they imbued, who they were, and really how they interacted with you, and how that might have impacted you. If you're having problems in a relationship, in a job, in just you want to become better, more social with people, whatever it is that you feel that you struggle in life, ask yourself how your parents responded to that. Are you just like them, or are you compensating by being the polar opposite? And so I would suggest saying, hey, get out a piece of paper, write all the positive aspects about your parents. What do you love about them? What are traits that you admire? What are the superhero traits? And then take out another piece of paper and say all the negative aspects about your parents. What do you not like about them? What sort of behavioral faults do you feel like they had? Now, take out a third piece of paper. Ask yourself, what parts of myself are like this, the better parts of them? And what parts of myself are like the worst parts of self? And see how you interact with them. Because if you find yourself 100% wholly identified with their good parts and their bad parts, then you have something of a problem, because you haven't developed, right? You haven't evolved from their shadow. You were just recapitulating the same cycle of shadow and light, consciousness. And so, if you find yourself the polar opposite, all the parts of their conscious mentality, all the parts of what you perceive to be good, you're weak at, and all the parts of their shadow, all the parts that they were bad at, you're great at, then you have a problem. See, that's natural to overly compensate, because we take what we are given, and typically that's the worst aspects, right? And then we try to put our spin on it and improve upon it. But if you overly compensate, right, now you are deficient in what their strengths were. And that's why it behooves you to become conscious of it. To know, like, oh, maybe my father figure was not the best at this one thing. Maybe he wasn't extrovert. Maybe he didn't talk to people. And so I become hyper extrovert and I don't have any time for myself. You might want to switch that, right? For me, it was a little bit of the opposite. So I try to be a little more extroverted when I can, right? And so thinking about that dynamic is really important. And I'll end it on this. There are some ideas, some ideologies out there that believe that for a time and period, I believe it's Eastern methodology, you take up a persona, an identity that's the polar opposite of your current identity, and you live in it for a little bit, and that will teach you a lot. And so if you think about it, if you ponder about it, what aspects of myself am I weakest in? And that I may be weak at because of this parental shadow, right? And you focus on that, now you have an immense opportunity for growth, right? Because it's in assimilating the shadow content. It's in dealing and grappling with the dark, funky abyss that we have inherited that we truly become the most potential and actualizing and beautiful people that we truly are. And imperfect. Because I just realized as I was saying that, I was like, potential? No, not really. We're imperfect, right? And so you realize you're never going to fully actualize yourself. But as you climb the rope, as you go along further in this journey, you become closer and closer, right, to something very special. And only you can find out what that really means, what the answer is to your own journey.